Hey everyone, welcome again to Friday Elevate.Strategy Leadership Live Unplugged. And every week the name gets longer and longer. I can't decide what to call it, but it's basically unplugged because what I found obviously is that through the weeks of interviews that it's really just become very sort of organic conversation as we learn about stories of business leaders. So, and I'm really excited. Every week is exciting, but this week is particularly exciting because our guest, he may not know this, but when I met him probably about 19 years ago or something like that, he was sort of in the consulting world. He was an academic, and he still is an academic, but a lot of what he had to do has some real practical implications as far as our consulting work had. And he was formative for me because he sort of framed things very differently as far as how to view business and how to view strategy behind that. So I started off as strategy consulting. But one of the things I love, so for two things, number one is where are you from? If you're live watching today, please drop a note below. Love to hear from you, see where you guys are at. If you're post-broadcast, no problem at all. Put that in there as well. Would love to hear from you guys. The second thing is, so this guest today was a vital part of the initiation of this idea called disruptive innovation. And ever since I left Deloitte, 18 years ago, I've seen so much noise around these terminology around disruptive innovation, and a lot of it has been good, a lot of it has been weird, right? People taking on sort of terminology and kind of turning it into their own kind of a thing. But I want to hear from you guys, and a lot of you are quite senior. I know a lot of you are my clients and people I've worked with. Have you heard of the term disruptive innovation? And if you have, what do you associate that with in your own career, right? Disruptive innovation. So, throughout the years, the internet, for example, has had lots of examples of disruptive innovation, etc. And my guest today, Michael Raynor, has had lots and lots of things to say about that through some of his talks he's given and some of the things that he's written about. So we'll talk about that in a second. But anyway, drop a note below. Love to hear from you. I have a lot of thoughts around that because I heard it from the source. Clayton Christensen from Harvard Business School was one of the pioneers of that, and Michael worked with him as well. So really glad to know him. So anyway, let me just give an official bio introduction, and then we'll go straight to him. Okay. So Michael Raynor is a managing director with Deloitte LLP. He leads a project, a startup platform to mobilize, supply, and stimulate demand for forestry-based carbon removal offsets in support of corporate net zero commitments. This work is informed by decades of research and client work on the topics of strategy and innovation, encapsulated in hundreds of articles in leading popular and academic journals, including the Harvard Business Review and the Strategic Management Journal. He has authored 4 best-selling and critically acclaimed books: The Innovator Solution in 2003 with the late Clayton Christensen, The Innovator's Manifesto in 2009, The Strategy Paradox in 2007, and with Mumtaz Ahmed, The 3 Rules How Exceptional Companies Think in 2013. And oh, by the way, he has a TEDx talk on that. So as I watched that as well, exceptional. Michael has a doctorate from the Harvard Business School and a philosophy degree from Harvard University. And he is a fellow Canadian, I'm proud to say. He lives in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada. So without further ado, I'm going to pull him at front stage here. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen you in person, and but I've seen you sort of on screen, and I've seen you through your articles, so in your books. So it's almost like I've stuck close to you, but in a very strange way. So
it's like you never left.
Yeah, and I was just saying, that you actually were very instrumental in shaping the way that I thought about business for the next 20 years. And so, I need to give accolades to where they are because it's actually part of your journey, the way that you impact other people. And for a lot of the folks that I've worked with, a lot of my clients, just to acknowledge kind of where they've built up their repertoire of knowledge from, is always very it's always very refreshing to remember that and kind of base a lot of the foundation of decisions on some of the things we've learned. So anyway, I introduced you formally, but I'd love for you to maybe share with the folks what it is that you do today and, what is a day in the life of Michael first.
Yeah, I think, well, everybody's got a day in the life story that has changed pretty dramatically for obvious reasons. But sure, I've been, you mentioned the forestry carbon offset project. That in its particular is relatively recent, but generally since November, almost to the day for the last 2 years, I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to focus exclusively in my role at Deloitte on questions of mobilizing collective action in the fight against climate change. And I have many reasons to be grateful to Deloitte over the years and the opportunities they've afforded me, but particularly so now. At the risk of jumping to the punchline in terms of what really is almost an obsession for me these days.
Okay.
I think we're all on our own journey when it comes to how we feel about climate change and what we're prepared to do and invest about it. And this sounds, coming out of my mouth, I know it sounds a bit trite, but it's certainly heartfelt. You know, I don't judge really anybody who has a different view than I do in terms of the intensity of their feeling about it and the urgency of the matter. But to share my own personal journey, I guess it was, and it really is quite clear in my mind. It was early in 2017. When, as a consequence of the fact that I've had a long-standing interest in the topic of natural selection and evolution, I was doing a lot of reading about mass extinctions. And so I was reading about the Permian extinction, which was 252 million years ago. It's the greatest of the now 6, if you count the current one. It was up to that point the greatest of the big 5 mass extinctions, wiped out 96% of all I'm not getting this precisely correct, so those who know better will, I hope, forgive me, but it wiped out on the order of 96% of life on the planet. And indeed, complex multicellular life came to within a whisker of being extinguished utterly. And that extinction was a function of carbon pollution as a result of massive and continued volcanism in what is now what's called the Deccan Flats in Siberia. Over the course of about 20,000 years, the carbon concentrations increased sufficiently rapidly that it acidified the oceans. There was massive temperature increase, and life is quite adaptable, but can only adapt when the change is slow enough, right? Rapid change is catastrophic, as it proved. And I started thinking, I wonder how fast we're increasing atmospheric carbon now compared to this horrible mass extinction. And simply based on doing some arithmetic off of numbers on Wikipedia, I came to the conclusion that we were changing atmospheric carbon about 200,000 times faster, which terrified me. And entirely coincidentally, well, as a consequence of what seemed to me to be a terrifying conclusion, but cognizant of the fact that, look, I was doing almost literally back of the envelope calculations based off numbers on Wikipedia. I wasn't going to take it too seriously. So I started doing some rummaging about on the internet, and I found a paleoclimatologist at MIT, Daniel Rothman. And I sent him a note, just, you know, I've been doing this long enough, pardon me, that I have no shame anymore. I'll send an email to anybody. And said, Professor Rothman, I was messing around and I came up with this seemingly ridiculous conclusion. What do you think? I mean, please tell me I'm nuts. And to my dismay, he wrote me back and said, actually, that looks about right. And here's an in-press paper that I've been working on that explores precisely this topic. And it's called Carbon Cycles and Catastrophe in the Earth's Climate. And that's basically what he was saying, that on our current trajectory by 2100, we will be in a position to have triggered the kind of climate catastrophe of which the Permian extinction is an example.
Okay.
So that's the wind up. Here's the pitch. What that means is that as a matter of geophysics, the climate change catastrophe that we're facing is not economic in nature. It's not extreme weather events and mass migrations and large-scale human death, all of which is catastrophic in its own right, to be sure. But what we need to be prepared to entertain is what we are facing is the extinction of complex multicellular life on the planet.
Right.
That sounds like I should put on a tinfoil hat when I say that.
Yeah, sure.
But it appears to be true. And so I've fallen into I used to talk about this at the dinner table in front of my son, who at the time was, 12. He said, "Dad, you need to stop talking about this because it's depressing." And he was right. So I don't talk about it at home much anymore. And indeed, I don't really say much about it, save circumstances like this when there's an opportunity to have a serious conversation about it. But I've fallen into what I've chosen to adopt a posture of what I'll call clear-eyed panic. Because I think that's warranted. And I won't burden you or your audience with any more of those details, but as a consequence of that, back to where I started, gratitude toward the firm, they gave me the opportunity to focus full time on finding ways to mobilize different types of collective action. And in my role at Deloitte, that has included getting involved with aggregating demand and stimulating supply for sustainable aviation fuel. So biofuels to substitute for jet fuel, which reduces the carbon intensity of air travel by about 80%. Mobilizing the deployment of electric vehicles in ride-hailing services, right? Both the platform-based ride-hailing services as well as localized taxi services, and now this additional project that is starting to gain a little bit of traction, and I say little bit advisedly because it really is a little bit at this point, but I nevertheless remain hopeful, that is intended to stimulate, as you mentioned, demand and supply to plant trees on a massive scale in an attempt to buy us some time.
Right.
As nearly as I can tell, there's somewhere between, based on the analyses of people who know better than I, somewhere between 100 and 300 gigatons of carbon that we could sequester, not on an ongoing basis, just in total, right? We could increase the carbon stock. That's enough to buy the world a decade or more, maybe as much as 12, 15 years to successfully decarbonize. And that's 15 years we desperately need. Right. So that's what I'm working on now, and it really occupies pretty close to all of my professional energies these days. So I apologize for the long-winded overture, but that's my idée fixe these days.
Right.
And I promise we don't have to spend the rest of the time talking about climate change. I promise.
No, yeah, and that's what. No, but I was just thinking. You've always been a man of passion. So, when you are fixated on something, I've noticed that's a pattern. I do remember the project that we worked together on, and it was quite frustrating at that point because you had a very specific point of your thesis that you wanted to really get down to. That's kind of what you're doing now too. Let me ask you this: why is this important to you?
The climate change thing?
Yeah. No,
well, I mean, that my hope is that's almost self-evident, given what I think is at stake, right? I mean, it's this is about preserving the habitability of the planet. Mm-hmm. Human beings are apex predators, right? And when there is a mass extinction, apex predators are the first to go. So we will not do well if the collapse that is not just possible, but in the eyes of some, almost likely, if that comes to pass, we're done for. Forget this whole notion of economic distress, or indeed, some people might be willing to entertain the concept of some form of civilizational collapse. I'm not talking about that anymore. I'm talking about 500 years from now, human beings are extinct as a species.
Right.
I mean, like I said, I realize I go out on a limb when I make that claim, because it sounds ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, that doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah, right. When you are encountering, so you pitch something that's sounds quite radical, right, as an idea. And I think in reality, a lot of the common person do not have the luxury of thinking through these things as carefully as you do. But they also equally have areas of passion that they're trying to convince other people's about. And a lot of times what I encounter is, the story of someone who's going through their career and sort of being drawn out by a tidal wave and not being able to have a voice about what they really want to do. So let me ask you, when you encounter, not the naysayers, but how do you adequately communicate and sort of work up the ladder to make sure that I mean, the idea of ideation is disseminating, right? So the more people who gather information and care about it, the better it is. Yeah. So how do you go about doing that to make sure that your message is clear and getting across to the right people?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny. I was prior to this conversation, I was thinking briefly about where this conversation might go and what its significance might be. And in some ways, I'm kind of the worst person to ask about how I've conducted any part of my life, right? I mean, I'm from the inside looking out. I probably don't have a particularly objective view. Right. So very often these conversations are kind of sense-making opportunities rather than accurate reports of what actually happened. Right. So I'll make no representations as to how closely this tracks the truth. But I can tell you what it seemed like to me in retrospect, which is what you characterize as passion, which may be a little high sounding. I've kind of viewed as irrational persistence, and that's been true, I think, for many of the projects that I've been involved in, some of which have worked and some of which haven't. Or at least haven't worked, have fallen materially short of what I had hoped and indeed in some cases expected of them.
Okay.
Right? So success and failure is rarely binary. It's a sliding scale. Sometimes things have exceeded my expectations by a lot or a little, or fallen short by a little or a lot. Mm-hmm. But in every case, I'd say it really has been a case of irrational persistence until it really just, and at some point you do give up, right? And who's to say whether I should have? Maybe if I'd stuck with some of the things that had proved disappointing just a little bit longer, I might have turned them around. I'll never know. And then in terms of, as you say, how do you convince others to listen so that you can be successful? There's lots of stuff written out there on how to be a successful communicator. Nothing works all the time. Mm-hmm. And, this isn't all that inspiring, but I think it's helpfully accurate, which is that the bad news is that failure is an option. And the reason irrational persistence can prove successful is that eventually you find somebody who can hear you and appreciates what it is you have to offer.
Right.
So, you've heard the old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. That expression has always said to me that it's not about adapting to the circumstances. It's about the circumstances catching up with you. And sometimes that's what it amounts to. You keep doing what you know how to do. You keep doing what you believe in. And if you're if you can keep at it long enough and be just enough lucky that finally the tumblers click, then you're away to the races. The idea that some people may well be smart enough and insightful enough to figure out precisely how they have to adjust their message in order to create I don't think I'm one of those people. I think I've got my 10,000 hours in with respect to particular ways of approaching problems.
Right.
It's proved this back to the power of evolutionary theory, right? It has proved adaptive enough that here I am. And I don't know that I've got the wherewithal. For example, with this carbon offset trading scheme, I don't know that I've got the wherewithal to figure out precisely how to make it successful regardless of the circumstances.
Right. Yeah, you talked about, and precisely that the failure is an option was actually a theme of mine in my TEDx talk, where that irrational persistence is premised upon the fact that you're not afraid that failure is an option, right? And I think that that's the fear that sometimes people have is, what if I fail, right? And then my question is always, well, what's your definition of failure? Is it economic? Is it psychological? Is it whatever it is? But yeah, I mean, it is irrational in that sense because, I mean, by nature, I don't think anybody wants to fail. It's not the best position to
No,
be
I mean, yes, by definition, that's not that. It's kind of like sadists who think that, or masochists rather, who think that pain is pleasure. I'm like, wait a minute, if it's pleasure, how can it be pain? It seems like it's a definitional impossibility. So nobody seeks out failure. I would agree.
Yeah, but I would say that's sort of, anyway, I think it's a bit of a spice of life. My TEDx talk really was about that failure is not only an option, but sometimes it's the best option, right? To teach you. Michael, let me go back quickly to something about you said about trying hard and sometimes just having to kind of give up, right? What is your litmus test for people to kind of say when it's time? When is it time to sort of say, you know what, let's fold up? Sometimes that means, so in my context, it's around career transition. It's about like trying to pivot to something that you're not really good at, but you really want to be good at. And so the question is always like, should I give up? Or should I keep going? Like, do you have sort of some sort of internal metric?
Yeah, I think I do. I mean, sometimes you have no choice. You just have no choice, right? You just don't have the resources, don't have there's literally no choice. There have been things I've done even at the firm where I would have gladly have continued to push on them, where I simply didn't have control over the appropriate resources. Others did, and they disagreed, and that's that, right? Game's over.
Yeah.
The other part, I guess I would say, is you don't, I guess it's simply a question of regret, right? Which is all you can do is run the thought experiment and say, do you think you would regret not having tried harder? You know, what would you regret more, giving up or pressing on? And I don't know how helpful that is as advice, but in the absence of sort of a time machine or a virtual reality monitor that lets you actually run the model, or that lets you run the simulation, that's the best I can come up with, and that's something that I've asked myself. You know, would I regret not having tried again? And it's times like that when you move on and think, okay, it's time to look for something else. I mean, I've done 4 books, I've done hundreds of articles and all kinds of, and probably thousands of presentations and speeches over the years, and I don't do that anymore. Like, I don't publish stuff anymore. I don't do that anymore. And I don't, I haven't reached the heights of, Mount Rushmore thought leadership that I may have once entertained as a possibility for myself.
Right.
But I don't regret having moved on. I gave it the best I had under good circumstances. I achieved what I achieved, but rather than, which fell short of what I would have hoped to have accomplished, but in the end, I don't regret having moved on. And it was a couple of years of casting about for something else that I found engaging. And as I mentioned at the outset, probably around 2017, the climate change thing really started to occupy my energies. And by 2019, the opportunity to do so with the resources and the support of Deloitte presented itself, and so now that's what I'm all about.
Gotcha. If we go back to now talking about your career journey and how you started off, here, and you ended up where you are today, can you share a little bit about kind of, where you started off? What were your hopes and dreams when you kind of came out? Like, what was your ideal thing? and what was the pathway that you took to kind of get to where you are today? I mean, I'm sure it's fraught with surprises, but I'd love to kind of hear about that journey, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, I guess the biggest surprise is that I ended up coming back into consulting when I finished my doctorate. So I did my undergrad in philosophy. I had no idea. The only thing I knew for sure is I didn't want to go to law school. And I ended up with a job that, in retrospect, I never should have taken, with a small, if you can believe it, statistical quality control firm. So with an undergrad degree in philosophy, I was drawing Shewhart control charts. And that was my introduction to kind of cookbook statistics.
Right.
Which in the long run proved enormously useful, I should point out. But as a planned career choice, it didn't prove to be particularly debilitating, but it was not a good choice. It just wasn't law school, which is about the only thing it had going for it. And so I did that for a little while, and then I realized, oh wait, so business can be a thing. So just to give you an idea of how clueless I was. So I ended up doing an MBA at the Ivey Business School in London, Ontario. That's when I discovered, oh wait, you could even do doctoral programs. So I sat in on a couple doctoral seminars, but I came out and I ended up getting a job in consulting with Deloitte, and then did that for a couple of years and thought, no, this PhD thing sounds really cool. And so the thought was, well, I'll go do a PhD. I will get my union card and become a business school professor. That'd be great. So I ended up going to HBS, getting my doctorate, finishing up in 2000, which is distressingly long ago, and thinking, okay, so I'm going to go become a business school prof, and ended up coming back to Deloitte, to my shock and amazement. So that was an unexpected turn in the road, and I've been here ever since, in one form or another. And that gave me the opportunity. It wasn't in a line consulting role, though. So they had just stood up something called Deloitte Research about 2 years prior.
Right.
So I had the opportunity to join that. And so it wasn't a billable hour client service role at all. It was an opportunity to write what in the consulting business is called, somewhat self-importantly, thought leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I spent really most from 2000 up through 2015, 2016. That was my career.
Right.
And so that turned into the opportunity to do the 4 books that I mentioned, all of the articles, the speaking, the seminars, the whole bit. And so it was this very hybrid type existence, which lent itself to meaningful interaction with clients and other professionals, but also some of the liberty and the resources to do research that I found engaging.
So I have a few questions there. So number one is, why not law school? What was the issue there that you decided, no, this is not?
Oh, because the only reason I had to go was to law school is because I couldn't come up with anything else to do. It just seemed like sort of the obvious thing. All through high school, I'd been on high school debate teams and done really, really well with all of that. And so there was kind of this sort of generalized expectation from teachers and all the rest that, oh yeah, you should absolutely go be a lawyer. And so not that I got anything against being a lawyer, but for whatever reason, even if it was just a classic case of very mild, to be sure, teenage rebellion, which is you're determined not to do the one thing that everyone thinks you should go do.
Right.
So whether or not that was a good choice, who knows? But that was the choice I made.
Gotcha. And you said just throughout your sharing just now that a constant theme was you found yourself doing something. You found yourself back at here. You found yourself. That to me sounds like it's not though, right? It sounds to me that you were kind of dragged along by the waves of reality, but you found yourself somewhere. What does that mean? You found yourself somewhere. How did you make those choices?
Yeah, I think I don't know. Right, like it could be the last. I'm in many ways the worst person to ask. I mean, as I reflect on it, in every instance, it's sort of, at the risk of sounding somewhat glib, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Faced with the alternatives, there was a lot. Which it's not as though there were 7 things to choose from.
Right.
And the options I had in front of me seemed really quite compelling. There was a lot to recommend them. Right. When it came to looking, for example, I suppose the biggest fork in the road was really going into academia or coming back to Deloitte in 2000. And in that case, I had applied to a number of top tier business schools, thinking, well, if I can't get the kind of position that I want at those kinds of schools, then I don't want to do that, right? Yeah. Not that there's anything wrong with any of literally hundreds of business schools around the world, but just in terms of what I wanted to do, that wasn't it. Right. And the position, I didn't get the offers that I wanted. And as it turned out, there was the opportunity to come back to Deloitte, where they said, hey, look, they knew me. I was a known quantity because I'd worked there for a couple of years. Right. And I won't be disingenuous about it. I mean, the imprimatur of coming out of Harvard, that's a powerful brand. Yeah. That's very useful. And the part that served me enormously well was having, I was never pardon me, I didn't do my thesis with Clay, but I had met Clay when I was in the program at HBS. He and I did a Deloitte monograph, 2002, something like that. And out of that came the request from him to collaborate with him on the Innovator solution, which was an enormous booster rocket, no question about it. I mean, right. Innovator's solution was the first follow-up to Innovator's Dilemma. Innovator's Dilemma had been a worldwide bestseller, had coined the term disruptive technology and specifically, and then Innovator's solution was the effort that pivoted the notion of disruptive technology to the concept of disruptive innovation more generally. And so that came out in 2003, and that was no question, that was absolutely life-changing.
Life-changing for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, because it gave me a level of visibility and credibility that, that you really wouldn't have, that I would not have had otherwise, right? I was, I'm second author on that book. I like to think for good reason. And I mean that to imply two things. First, it means that Clay should be first author on that book, right? I've had people say to me kind of sotto voce, oh, your second author, I bet you did all the work and he's just taken all the glory, which was Clay passed away, as many people may know, in 2020. And that absolutely is not true, right? So Clay's first author on that book because he should be. Not only were they his original ideas and concepts going all the way back to his thesis on the book itself, he did an enormous amount of work. Sure. But I'm second author for good reason, because I did a lot of it too. So I don't apologize for being there. I wasn't merely along for the ride. Yeah. And that collaboration with Clay is something that I cherish and that I'm very proud of. He and I did 3 other HBR articles together, and as many people say of Clay, with good reason, they count him among their having been among their very best friends. You'd be hard pressed to find people with a bad word to say about Clayton Christensen. So I count myself among his many fans. Right. Sure. So just back to sort of the career contrast, and I do have questions for you about Clay as a mentor and the importance of having a mentor in your life. So from consulting to being sort of more of a thought leader, what's the biggest difference as far as stimulation, as far as impact? The reason why I ask is because sometimes folks who can't really go back to industry for whatever reason have thought about going into teaching, have thought about going into academia, and many of them are very qualified for that. But what's the biggest difference you find there? That's a tough question for me to answer, because I haven't really spent a lot of time. I've never been a full-time academic. I have taught in kind of adjunct roles at Ivy. I've done, I've taught a series of classes at a couple of different business schools around the world. But the best, to call me a dabbler is to give me too much credit, I think, in terms of my insight into what a life as a business academic would look like.
Okay.
To the extent that I'm familiar with it, it's largely as a result of just having looked at it long and hard when I was in the doctoral program, and that's 20 years ago now.
Right.
So folks that are mid-career thinking, well, I'd like to be a business school teacher. That strikes me as a hard trick to turn, frankly.
Right. Gotcha.
Very often because it involves research and publishing and the credentialing that goes with having gone through it and the whole bit, right? So that's probably not news to most folks.
Yeah. Well, you know, the hard work that comes behind being an academic is probably not seen by most people as being a huge challenge, right? So I come from a science academia background, and the reason why I didn't pursue that was because you had to write grants every single year, and you just, you know, you're like huddled over a computer, like almost like clockwork, trying to get money from somewhere, at least in science. And it's such a hard life. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, it can be a lonely existence, I think. I mean, it's a big world and lots of people have different experiences, I'm sure. But, you know, I was just close enough to it to have I think a reasonable insight into what it can look like when it doesn't go well.
Right.
And it can be a pretty, to your point, it can be a pretty lonely existence. It can be kind of a bit of a hand to mouth thing where you're constantly looking for funding, and yeah, I agree.
So I got cut out there for a second. And so then going back to Clay as a friend, as a mentor, how important has that been in your life? Having a mentor, having a good friend that kind of gives you some guidance along the way. And do you are you sought after as a mentor? What do you try to do as far as, you know, baking something into other people's lives in their careers?
Yeah, so I don't know that I'd put Clay in the mentor category for me strictly, at least not as how I think about it. You know, a mentor, I think, is someone who provides advice and guidance and helps you make hard choices and that sort of thing. And that was really never our relationship. Clay and I collaborated on the ideas and on the expression of those ideas. And it's, you know, my kind of risk return profile and the career that I was building at Deloitte was such that this is where I felt comfortable. I wanted to grow where I was planted, and I didn't have a religious belief about staying put at Deloitte, but I never felt particularly compelled to actively explore alternatives. And I was, I think, level-headed enough that in the surge of popularity and visibility that came in the wake of the Innovator solution. You know, my agent at the time, and I had an agent, right, for speaking engagements and all that. I thought, wow, I'm pretty hot stuff. Look at me, I've got an agent. It was like, oh, you need to go on your own, you need to do this and that. And I'm like, you know, I don't think really I do need to, I don't think I really do need to do that. And I've never regretted staying put. It doesn't mean that there wasn't some, you know, rocket ship to the moon waiting for me, but I knew enough about myself, I think, to know that that just wasn't what I was going to be able to make work. You know, other people have pulled that off and been fabulously successful, and good for them. But I don't think I'd have been able to ride that particular horse.
Right.
But Clay and I stayed in touch for years and years. In fact, we did an article together. One of the ones that I think I'm proudest of, frankly, is the one from 2015 called "What is Disruptive Innovation?" And so he and I were in, you know, constant, you know, a couple of times a year. We would speak for, you know, half an hour, something like that. I might see him once every 18 months. And we'd have some particular project that we were exploring. Sometimes it came to something, sometimes it didn't. But it was always a pleasure to speak with him. So I found him a very helpful, and I think he found me quite a helpful foil as well. When I think about what I refer to affectionately as kind of the high priesthood of disruption theory, I was one of the few that I'd been there, not from the very beginning, of course. The very beginning goes back to 1995, but you know, I was there from kind of 2000, let's say 2003, Innovator solution onward, which is when it became, a worldwide phenomenon. And I was one of the few that worked with Clay closely on these ideas, whose financial fortunes in no way depended on what Clay thought of me.
Right.
There were lots of folks who had a lot to say about disruption who depended very directly on Clay's endorsements and support. And I don't know that that's necessarily good or bad, but people are now generally familiar enough with the notions of cognitive biases to know that no matter how well intentioned, that can't help but color your outlook in some small way. And so, and it was really helpful to have the opportunity to work with someone like Clay, so visible, so influential, so capable, and to feel at liberty to say, actually, Clay, I think you're wrong on this, that, or the other. And I say this only because he told me this himself in these words, which is that he valued that enormously himself. And so it's, I don't know that Clay had a lot of people with whom I don't know, he may have, right? So I don't say that I was one of two or three, but I don't know that he had a lot of people with whom he enjoyed that kind of a relationship. And that was special to me, that we were able to speak honestly. And an expression that I've always found a useful reminder is that truth emerges out of disagreements among friends. And that's something that I've learned a lot. I've learned far more out of my disagreements with people I respect and value than I've ever learned out of simply patting each other on the back for how clever we all are.
Yeah.
But that's not uncommon. I can't imagine anybody would. I'm sure a lot of people feel similarly about that. I'm simply saying that in particular, Clay is one of those people for me.
Right. Sure. So for all the success that you've had, and for all the reasons that you've stated, in some cases, it just seems like that it was the most logical thing to do at that time, which is a great way to live your life. What are a few examples of failures that you could share with us about?
Yeah, I would say, I think the work that I've done that I'm proudest of is the 3 rules work that I did with Mumtaz.
Okay.
And I think that was the most empirically rigorous, conceptually something that is perhaps among the most elegant and I think useful conclusions that we've come to. And it's disappointing to me that we weren't able to make a bigger splash with that work. And there were a number of initiatives that we had the opportunity to develop that we simply weren't able to give the right traction inside the firm. It really becomes an inside baseball discussion about the mechanics of the analysis, and trust me, it's I can talk about that stuff all day long. Max wouldn't find that terrifying, like the climate change thing. He'd just find it insufferably boring. So I don't talk about that stuff at the dinner table either. But that's a disappointment. That was something that I thought, wow, this is really great stuff, and then it just went thud. And that's, okay, that happens. That not every trip to the plate is a stand-up double. Right.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I did expose myself to that body of work, and I thought it wasn't just empirically robust, but like you said, it was you could do something about it after you watched it, which is very impactful, right? Because it's not just an academic theory that people have to kind of interpret it, but it had some really great action points after that. Let me ask you this: I guess I would just answer the own question, but it's maybe there's some more liberty when you're by yourself to do certain things like that, right? When you're sort of either self-funded or whatever it is, but
yeah, it depends on the resources at your disposal, right? So I mean, the given unlimited funds, that's great, but you can't. There's some expression out there about horses and leading them to water, right? I mean, just because I thought it was fabulous doesn't mean anybody else did. You know, people that have taken the time to comment have generally had nice things to say, but I'm not delusional either. The good news is that people, with the exception of, you know, the internet trolls, not a lot of people bother to tell you they think it's awful.
Yeah.
So, you know, it just didn't land, you know,
Gotcha.
for reasons that, that and I don't know why not.
Gotcha.
But okay, you know, there are, I've long known there are limits to my insight.
Mm-hmm. And has that been what's gotten you through situations like that? Are you genuinely an optimistic person, or do you have to force yourself to be?
I don't know. I think it's, I mean, the fact that I've done all of this within the bosom of Deloitte is a big part of it, right? I mean, when that didn't land the way we wanted it to, Deloitte didn't turn around and look at me and say, well, that failed, I guess we're going to have to shoot you.
Right.
Right. And the firm said, look, you know, part of the price of taking a swing at these sorts of things is they don't all work. And so the firm was very level-headed and gracious, and I think that's to their credit. And they said, you know, we value, we would have valued success even more, but we value the attempts, and we know that nobody bats 1,000, and so that's okay. On to the next. So you move on to the next phase of your career at the firm, and now I've landed here. So I don't take any bows for having been able to move on. Right? I mean, the firm provided the slack in the system required to figure out what's next.
Right. Yeah. And so then, given that, and given all you've had to have a lot of resilience to get through all of this. What would be what are some sort of simple, and for fear of being too simplistic, but pointers to people who are trying to go through, either they have an idea, a passion about what they want to do, but they're unsure about how to communicate that out, how to explore that. That's one type of person. Another type of person is trying to kind of keep pushing on in their career, that said, here are the 2 or 3 skills that you really need to develop to make sure that you're successful, or to make sure at least that you can make some sort of leap. So I guess the first kind is like someone who's passionate about an idea and really want to push it. What's 1 or 2 things they have to really grab into? The second person is they're trying to just push for it in their career, and they need to be really good at this in this day and age of AI or whatever it is, right?
I don't know. That's a good, I don't know. I'm not sure I have useful answers to those questions, frankly. Okay. I mean, it's, this may be unnecessary repetition. I mean, there's something to be said for irrational persistence. Okay. You also want to temper that with another cliche, you know, insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. So irrational persistence doesn't mean unending repetition. You know, so what are you persisting in? Well, the desire to see a particular set of ideas, a particular concept, a specific business concept brought to fruition. But you can't just keep repeating the same thing over and over, especially if you need to go back to the same audience.
Right.
And so understanding the extent to which you really are taking a different tack, that's something that you'll probably need, and this is occurring to me as I'm speaking, you'll need someone you can trust to tell you you're wrong. And you know, someone who wants you to succeed, but someone who's not willing to protect you from the mistakes you might be making. So the more of those people you can have in your life, perhaps the better off you'll be.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't think this is a question you asked, but it did occur to me in terms of, you know, kind of coping with, we'll just call it failure, and rather than papering it over. So how do you deal with that? How do you move on? How do you learn? I tend not to put a sunny smiley face on all of this. And no, it was the best thing that ever happened, and I learned so much and all that. I don't think I really learned that much from it not working out. And that one, you know, that one hurt. And that's just the way it is. And so sometimes you just have to carry the scar tissue and do the rehab and accept the fact that that knee is going to ache when it rains. Like, you don't always come out of these things better and stronger.
Yeah, sure.
And you have to be.
And that's okay.
Yeah, I have found that in my case, I won't. I'm old enough now that I know I don't know anything. I'm not going to claim that's a general principle. I'm just going to say that's what's helped me to just simply accept that fact.
Right, right. You know, your friend Bill Hunter, I interviewed him a couple of months ago, and he said to me that I just seek not to fail. I just avoid it at all costs, and you know, it's not healthy for you. And he said, well, think about all the catastrophic failures that have happened in your life, right? Like, has it really benefited you? And I found that to be a very hilarious response, because I mean, all you do hear in media and popular culture is that, you know, learn from your failures. You know, you're going to fail no matter what, and you'll come up stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and all that. And what I hear you saying is that accept the pain, and that's the reality of what it means to be a human being, exploring different things, and move on. Right, find a way to move on.
Yeah, one of the I won't say I learned a lot from Mad Men. But one of the things I learned from Mad Men is Don Draper was giving a pitch for the carousel, right? Which is what the slideshow. And he said, nostalgia, the word nostalgia comes from the ancient Greek, which is pain from an old wound.
Wow.
And it was sort of, nostalgia was when, you know, warriors, old soldiers would sit around and they'd compare their battle scars. You know, and so so pain from an old wound, and that's you know, so yeah, that's just another way of accepting the fact that these bad things happen. If you can learn from them, that's awesome. Like, absolutely, you don't want that to be the case. You don't want the suffering to have been pointless.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I guess what I would say is that equally, you don't want to fabricate a lesson or a learning or an insight in order to give the suffering some meaning, because then what you learn won't be true, and it won't be helpful, and it won't allow you to be successful. So yes, there may well be something to learn. You know what else? There may not be.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have any easy litmus tests to tell the difference.
Right.
But simply being honest with yourself about what there is to learn and to what extent just something bad happened, and simply move on.
So let me be a little bit controversial to the audience here, because and it's related to what you're saying, Michael. And so there's a big controversy about Dave Chappelle and this Netflix thing that he gave, and you know, so all the issues there. But one of the things that he mentioned was there was one of his best friends, he said, was a transgender woman, and they had gotten along very well. And one night they were having he was having a set, and they were having a great time. And so at one point, Dave said to this friend, you know, I don't understand you. And his friend just stopped and went dead serious. And she said, you know, I don't need you to understand me. I just need you to know I'm going through a human experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that kind of hit me a little bit, to say, you know, it's all kind of the trek and the journey, right? And what you do learn through this is you just gain experience. And I think there is a degree of wisdom, in the sense of, you know, if I do this again, this is probably what's going to happen, right? So I'm not going to probably do that again the next time I have a choice. And so that goes to, and we won't talk about this today, but the idea that a mentor is someone who kind of is someone that you can learn from through their mistakes. And it's not someone who just always pats you on the back and says, you know, you've been really great at these metrics and keep on doing what you're doing, but it's learning through their mistakes. So,
you know, I guess your comment makes me think this comes back to a role of a mentor, right? Which is and maybe I'll take back something I said earlier, and something I hadn't perhaps appreciated, right? Which is that maybe there is no one career description, or no one set of role description, or no one role description for a mentor. If someone can help you see your own life slightly more objectively, maybe that's what that offers, right? And so someone who can say, look, this failure, there is something to learn. This success, there is something to learn. This one, not so much. You know, you were successful over there because you got dumb lucky. Don't go confusing luck with skill.
Right.
Right. Don't try and repeat that because that's not repeat. You pick the right lottery numbers and nothing more. This over here, this failure, don't try and find any deeper meaning. That just sucked. Just suck it up and move on. Versus, you know, that do more of that because wow, you crushed it. And this over here, here's what I think you can extract from it. So someone to help you see your own life without your own reality distortion field, sort of reinterpreting what's happening through your own eyes. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those are very, there's a lot of things to unpack through what you're saying, through what we're talking about. And I think, you know, an hour doesn't do it justice, but I really do appreciate your thoughts. And I've learned a lot behind the scenes about what you've been doing, but more importantly, what's motivated you. And this latest project that you're working on right now is obviously something that is now a passion, deep passion of yours that is very encouraging. I think people take inspiration from passion. And I think that when someone has passion, they have focus, and people don't have passion that usually lack focus. That's one of the things that is a common theme for a lot of my clients is that they've got so much, they've got a body of work that's like a big report card. They're A+. I mean, but the point is that there's like 100 people like you outside. What is your thesis of your life, right? What is the focus in there? And that's something that you've exhibited over time when you're doing different projects, is that focus is so important to enable even a chance of success. So I appreciate this very much, Michael. We're approaching top of the hour. I have a few rapid fire questions for you. And if you did watch Bill Hunter, you'll know what they are. So first of all, did you watch it?
Bits and pieces. I didn't watch the full hour, but I went through.
You don't know the rapid fire, right?
I don't know the rapid fire, so this will be spontaneous.
Okay, let's go for it. So what is your alter ego profession? If you weren't doing what you're doing, what would you be doing?
Oh, geez, I don't know. A Red Bull racing pilot.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. The Red Bull is in the company sponsored racing.
Yeah, you know, they've got the plane, the plane races. Yeah, so I'm doing my private pilot's license. So I'd race planes.
You race planes? Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, sure.
What do you mean, sure? That sounds distressingly dismissive. I don't know. I appreciate that.
No, I haven't watched one before. So
second question.
All right. What's a book or a movie title? You read a lot of books, I know that. What's a book or movie title that would best represent your life to date?
That's an interesting one. Let's see. One that I've read or just one that I'm aware of?
No, either. Anything. Movie or book.
Wow. I'm stuck.
You can't name your own books, by the way. But
I know. I wasn't going to do that. The Far Side. Okay.
All right. For obvious reasons or not?
No, just the absurdity of it all. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, that is the spice of life too. Is the absurdity of a lot of things. A lot of things. Okay. What's one word that you hate?
Momentarily, because it is always misused. Momentarily means for a moment, not in a moment. I'll be there momentarily means I will show up and then leave immediately thereafter. If you want to say I'll be there in a moment, you say I'll be there presently.
Okay.
But you can add that to the long list of nits that I feel compelled to pick.
Okay.
But as I like to say, if nobody picked nits, the world would be full of nits. So
yeah.
Anyway.
Absolutely. What's one word that you love?
Presently, because nobody uses it the way they should.
Why was I not surprised by that?
There we go. So you should have seen that one coming.
Should have switched it. All right. Okay. All right, I won't ask you that. So last thing is, what is a COVID habit or hobby that you've developed, that you've done, you've built into your system?
I started running again. I blew my left ACL in 2014, and talking to the surgeon after the fact, I said, "So what about running?" He said, "Well, if you love to run, run." He says, "If you don't love to run, don't." And I was never a good runner. So you mentioned Bill. Bill's a good runner. Bill does marathons, and he's for real. Mm-hmm. I'm not, but I did a 10K probably twice a week. Okay. And so I gave that up because wasn't a big thing for me, and it was an insult to the knee, and I didn't bother. So it's now kind of almost 6 years later, and the knee is doing really very well. And so I started doing a 10K once a week again, and so far so good. If the knee starts acting up and it starts complaining, I will stop. But so far so good. So that's new as a result of COVID.
Gotcha. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Michael. And wishing you the very best with your project. And look forward to it's. I love your opinion about what's happening right now with the summit. I'm sure you have lots and lots of thoughts about that, but we don't have the time right now for that. But in any case, wishing you all the best, and I'm sure you'll go very far with whatever your endeavor is going to be. I'm curious to know how you're going to turn so much of that knowledge into something that's actionable, like you were saying earlier, something that you can sort of a call to action.
Yeah, me neither. Here's hoping. I'll need all the luck I can get, I'm sure.
All right. Okay, well, take care, and have a great weekend, Michael, and we'll talk to you soon.
And you. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.